Welcome, everyone, to the January 4th, 2024 Historic Preservation Commission meeting. I am Kara Myers, Chair of the Commission, and if the other commissioners would please introduce themselves for roll call.
Doris Davis, Fritch.
Kyle Wobser.
Thank you, and I believe Laurel DiCaprio and David Stites will not be with us here tonight, unable to attend. So tonight, following review of our November meeting minutes, we have a very special agenda. We have the good fortune of having our guest speaker, Linda Mackey of the State Historic Preservation, with us tonight. Welcome, Linda. So via Zoom, she will be sharing her expertise on state and federal programs that are administered by the State Historic Preservation Office. Our meeting will conclude at approximately 7:30. If further questions, Linda's going to provide us a little time, hopefully, at the end of her presentation if we had some questions. So just letting you know the end time, approximately 7:30. And if you do have any other questions, we can always refer them to Jill. So. Unfinished business. First order of business is to approve the minutes of the November 2nd, 2023 meeting. Was there any discussion or any notes? I had a couple of things. Did you have? I actually should have read this more carefully first off so that we didn't have to spend time doing it tonight. They're actually just a couple little typos. Do you want me to tell you now or just give you this sheet at the end?
If you just want to give me the sheet, that's fine, as long as it's not something substantial.
No, there were a couple typos, and the only other thing that I questioned, just because this is something that'll be in the record and folks might not have heard more of the conversation, is on page 2, where it's bullet points, where it's talking about meeting conditions. The last bullet point, the gate on the east side of the property, and maybe I'm overthinking this, shall be 6 feet wide, and the gate on the west side shall be 8 foot wide, because we had just been talking about the height of the fence, so it might not be that necessary, but it was just kind of a question I had when I quickly looked at it.
The other thing I think I'll also edit here is I'll remove, please see the graphics on pages 3 and 4. Because the graphics follow. Or I'll put in something along those lines, or please see the graphics below.
Okay. So that was it for me. So was there any further discussion from either of you? Kyle, did you see anything?
No, they look good to me.
Okay.
I'm okay with them.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the November 2nd?
I'll make the
Minutes.
motion to approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
Vote all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. So now on to the highlight of this evening's meeting. I would like to say a few words to introduce Linda Mackey. Linda works as a historic preservation program analyst in the Survey and National Register Unit at the State Historic Preservation Office. She holds a BA in anthropology from the University of Buffalo, an MS in historic preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. Prior to her employment with SHPO, she worked in the private sector as an architectural historian, conducting large-scale surveys and assisting federal agencies in fulfilling their duties under Section 106. At SHPO, Linda is responsible for overseeing the statewide inventory of historic resources in New York City, preparing determinations of eligibility, and assisting communities with surveys to identify and evaluate historic resources worthy of protection. Additionally, she provides guidance to the public in developing and completing official National Register nomination forms and assists in the identification of buildings that are eligible for the historic tax credit programs. Lastly, she works with a certified local government coordinator to provide training and support to municipalities formerly designated as CLGs, like us, by the National Park Service. So thank you so much for joining us today, Linda.
No, thank you. Wow, I do many things.
Are you tired?
I am tired. I'm glad I'm sitting down. No, but it's all fun. I love it. I've been with SHPO for 10.5 years now. So that's why I've acquired many skills over those 10 years. First, apologize my voice. I'm getting over a sinus infection. So apologize if I'm a little stuffy still. It's a good thing we're virtual because I like to share knowledge, not my germs. So this is good that we did plan on a virtual training today. So let's see, if you could advance probably 2 slides. Yeah, one more. So what I'm going to be presenting, I'm kind of keeping it a little high level, but I welcome questions, going off on tangents. So I kind of keep it, pretty open. But I wanted to first start with SHPO, talk about some of the state federal programs we administer. I do have a slide with some additional, like some other organizations that you could reach out to for assistance. And then we could talk about the Certified Local Government Program. So kind of, again, high level, but it is a lot of information, a lot to cover. So I try to keep it a little focused. First, if we can go back one slide. Perfect. So we were established, the SHPO established under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Every state has a SHPO. We fall under the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation as a state agency. So every SHPO is kind of under a different agency depending on the state. But the act also established the National Register of Historic Places, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and that is that federal project review, the Federal Commercial Rehabilitation Tax Credit, and then the Certified Local Government Program, which was an amendment in 1980. And I will have slides on these topics coming up. Next slide. So state programs, they kind of mirror the federal programs. We have the State Register of Historic Places. The State National Register listing is a linear process. We have Section 1409 of the New York State Historic Preservation Act that was passed in 1980. So state agencies, their project review. We have both state commercial and homeowner rehabilitation tax credits. We do have grants for restoration. That is the EPF, Environmental Protection Fund. So municipalities, nonprofits, they could apply for funding. It could be a preservation, restoration type project. There are parks projects as well. And I think we just actually, the next cycle begins later this year for that. And then we also do public outreach and education. So like tonight, this is part of what we do for CLG, but we also hold tax credit workshops. And I've also done presentations, and my fellow staff have done presentations on National Register, just general discussions. We've done things on even 106. We've done some education for other agencies. So it's kind of, it's definitely a role that we play. Next slide. There we go. So for Section 106 and 1409, I like to talk about this because sometimes these reviews actually sometimes overlap with historic commissions or even, just general at the local level. I know often people think that if a property is on the National Register, oh, we have to go to SHPO. And really the trigger for our involvement is the state federal agency, if they have funding, permitting, or licensing. So more often than not, we'll see like a DEC permit, Army Corps. We might see HUD funding or HCR funding. We could see something from SED. So it really is, we have a long list of even ones that I've never heard of. And I'm like, who is this? Yeah, I think there's a new one relatively, ORIS. I think it's off, I think it's a renewable energy and siting. So they do more of the solar farms. So that really is the trigger because they are responsible under these acts to take into account their actions on historic resources. And so they consult with us. And our role is to assess impacts to any historic resources. So for above ground and Survey National Register, we look to see, will it impact a resource that is eligible or listed? So we could make that determination as part of the project review, or often where I'm in New York City, often a lot of things are already listed. So it's kind of easy for me, and I pass it on to staff in our technical unit, and they assess impacts. And then we also have an archaeology unit. If there's ground disturbance, they would review for impacts in the archaeological resources. And I would like to always point out is that a resource that is determined eligible is treated the same as if it was listed as part of this project review. And the goal is always to avoid, minimize, or mitigate any adverse impacts. So if there is a demolition of a historic building, the staff in the tech unit, they will work with the agency or with the consultants who are submitting the project. Hey, how can we look at alternatives? If you can't find an alternative, something that is feasible, then we have to move into a legal agreement document and mitigate any adverse impact. So we don't stop projects, but it's kind of a way to put that pause button just to say, hey, let's take a step back and see all their alternatives. How can we, move this forward with while still retaining that resource? So again, we don't stop. It is a process. But sometimes we do overlap reviews if there is a local landmark, a local historic district. So property owners might come to us, also come to the commission. And whenever commissioners might reach out to me, I make sure that I connect them with the appropriate reviewers on our end. I know in Monroe County, I know definitely Virginia Bartos, you probably worked with her, she's the National Register rep. She is that first step in that process because it's important to connect you guys with who is reviewing the project on our end. So we keep that open communication. Next slide. So State and National Register. So that is our official list, of course, of resources that are significant, local, state, and national levels. We have various property types, but I include, obviously, more often than not, it is a building, but it could be a site, a structure. We look at rural or design landscapes. We list boats. You never know. Generally, that resource must be 50 years of age or older. There is a consideration for resources that are less than 50 years of age. There's specific requirements as far as exceptional significance to make that case for eligibility. But all resources must retain sufficient integrity to convey that significance. So significance, it could be one of the 4 criteria, whether it's an event, it could be the design, the architecture, maybe a significant person. The last criteria is D, that's yielding information. That's usually reserved for archaeology. We don't have too many of those on the National Register. That's kind of underrepresented, but usually it could be looped into a above ground resource as well. Now, I know, Jill, you said did you want to learn a little bit more for National Register as far as the start to finish process? Because I think you said some folks are interested, so I can kind of explain the overall general process of getting a property on the National Register.
That would be fantastic.
Okay. So always the first step is whether it's an individual property, individual owner, or a district, usually it might be an organization, a municipality that's coming to us for a district. The first step is always to confirm that eligibility. So we do have a preliminary information form. And we do look in our CRIS database. We have an online database that's accessible from our website. The general public can search for free, look at our statewide inventory, kind of see what we have. And but what we like to do, we need to have photographs for an individual building. We look at the exterior and interior, and then we also ask for a history. And usually that history, date of construction, do you know the architect, dates of any changes, and maybe who lived there, or did a certain event take place, or maybe it was a specific architect. So usually that history helps to formulate the potential significance of that resource. And for a district, we also want photos, usually more streetscape, to get a sense of the overall view. But then we also like to see maybe some maps, historic maps, a boundary, a history of that area, whether it's a commercial strip, maybe it's part of a neighborhood, it could be a speculative development. We like to see, justification of that boundary and what occurred there. It could be just, this is a speculative development, early 20th century architecture. intact. So you can, clearly draw a boundary there. We would review that information, and we still accept email, we accept paper, you can submit it through Chris. We're not particular about how it's submitted. And so we might ask for more information. We might not, but we usually do schedule a site visit because it's nice to, the photos are great. The history is great. It's good to have that something to react to, but it doesn't replace being physically there, being able to walk through a building, walk around a neighborhood to really get that sense of place. But once we do confirm eligibility, we'll have something official on our database. So we have that record. And then we will work with the applicant and provide guidance on, okay, next step is to draft a National Register nomination. We do have a form. There's a National Register bulletins. We also have example nominations that we share. We don't write them, but we do assist with editing, making sure they meet the standards. Typically if there's an organization, maybe there's a company who's looking to list a building on the National Register to access tax credits, they usually hire a consultant to prepare that documentation. And again, we still work with them editing. So that's probably how, it takes some time to get that nomination drafted. It really depends on the consultant and who is writing it. So that's like probably the bulk of the time. But once we have a solid draft, we do meet, the next step would be, okay, we have to have it on the state register first. And we have 4 meetings, quarterly meetings, March, June, September, and December. And once we settle on a date, then we kind of work way back with specific notifications. But we do, like, let's say the next meeting is this March. So we will present the nomination to the board, a couple minutes, because we do submit the drafts to them for review. They might have some comments, the consultant might talk about it, the owner might comment on the nomination, but they will vote. Usually they approve. We would not present something to the board that we don't think would be listable. So they would approve it. And then our deputy commissioner signs the cover page. We package everything up. We send it to the National Park Service for approval and listing on the National Register. So from start to finish, it really depends on that development of that nomination. But it could take 6 months. It could take a year. With historic districts, it could take a little longer because you're working with multiple owners. There has to be more public outreach and education. And that building list can take a little time to prepare. But it does take some time. But, we do have guidance, and it's our job to help every step of the way to make sure that we shepherd that nomination through the process. So, and it is fun because you really take a deep dive into the research and learning about different resources. You never know what you're going to learn about. I do cover New York City. I'll be switching territories a little bit pretty soon, but we're doing a lot of public housing right now, but then we also have, bank building. I did one with a building that's near Penn Station. That was the Lithuanian Alliance Association. It was a settlement society for immigrants coming to the country to assimilate into American life. There's also huge districts up in Harlem I've worked on. So it's really fun to really take a little bit deeper dive into the history and significance. That compliance 429-106 review, it's much more high level when you're researching and making evaluation of a resource. So yeah, so that's kind of the nuts to bolts short version of the National Register listing process. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of words on here, but I always like to kind of compare, a little chart with, the difference between state and National Register and local designation. Sometimes that is a little bit of a point of confusion of what each means and what, what are the implications of each of those. And we do share this. We have a flyer for this as well, because we share this with our district nominations. But, on the one side with state and National Register, it is out of that state federal preservation law. It is primarily honorary. A private owner, if they're using their own funds, they can do whatever they want because it's not that state federal involvement. So they can change out windows, they can, got the interior. I mean, as long as they're using their own money. It only offers a measure of protection for the state and federal projects. So that's 1409 and 106. And there has to be that trigger, that funding or permitting. Although on the positive side, you can access historic tax credit programs, the homeowner, and then the commercial tax credit. So that's a big driver, not just honorary, but there's a big driver for a National Register listing. And on the other side, for local landmark designation, that's really built into your zoning code. So, we kind of say the local commissions are kind of on the front lines because it being built in the code, exterior changes are being reviewed by the commission, outside of ordinary maintenance. So you see a lot more than we do. And so even though, yes, the powers might vary a little bit, for CLG, we base everything on the model law, but there are many other communities in the state that have some type of legislation that are not, that are not CLGs, that might be advisory, that might only look at certain aspects. But CLGs, of course, look at the exterior changes in that design review process. And on the plus side, that does provide greater control with demolition and new construction, because we don't often see that. And it does provide better protection for neighborhood character. So definitely in your historic districts. Next slide. So tax credits, because I did look, you have some National Register listed properties, I think a couple of districts, and you're in a qualifying census tract. So I figured I'd kind of touch a little bit high level on the 2 tax credit programs. Now for the state homeowner, that's a 20%. Some of the basic requirements, you must own and live in the house. The property must be in an eligible census tract. And what that means is that the census tract, the median income has to be at or below the state median income. And I think we do have a layer in CRIS that we can turn on and off to see, but I'm pretty sure almost the entire village might be in that qualifying census tract. So that's a plus. It's not a grant. It is a tax credit. So that's a dollar for dollar reduction on the state income tax that you owe. The project cost must be minimum $5,000. And some people, sometimes that, it can be a challenge to meet that. I purchased my first house not too long ago, and I could very easily probably meet that. I kind of took on a little bit of a fixer. At least 5% of the expenditures must be on the exterior. So even if you do repair a roof, replace your roof, window repair, you're painting something, repointing brick, that would count toward that 5%. It is a 3-part application. You can submit these online electronically through DocuSign, which it's actually been very helpful. You can use credit card, you don't have to write a check. So you can, but the work does need to be pre-approved by SHPO before you begin the work. Luckily, the part 1, part 2 is a combined application. My role in survey NR is I confirm eligibility, which is kind of easy. I look to see if it's listed and if it's in a qualifying census tract, and then I pass it on to my tech reviewer who looks at that scope of work, and they use the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation when reviewing that scope. If your income is below $60,000, there is a checkbox on the form. Then the credit can be taken as a refund. Next slide.
Linda, can I ask a question about
Of course.
The 3-part application, is that something that the average homeowner can complete themselves, or is
Yes.
Okay, it is.
Yep.
So it's not something that a consultant is required for.
No.
It's something that's pretty manageable.
No, it's very, we try and make this one as easy possible, and it only goes to us. Like the federal commercial, that's a bit more complicated, but this, we try and make it as straightforward as possible with just basic information. As far as we do have a sample application on our website to give you a sense of, filling in the scope of work. It's really a chart as far as, what is the damage, how you're going to repair it, and what's the estimate. We only need estimates for cost. And it's really just basic information. So, and you are more than welcome to talk to us if you have any questions. We're here to help through that process. So, and also, because I'm keeping it a little bit high level, you are more than welcome to reach out, and I can put you in touch with the staff to do a tax credit workshop So you can take a much deeper dive into the application process, what you can and cannot do, any of those specific questions. Although I do know the Preservation League of New York State, they do have, I think, some recorded videos, some tax credit workshop presentations too. But again, you're still more than welcome to contact our office. So what buildings qualify? So listed individually on the State and National Register, or if it's a contributing building in a historic district, located in a local district that's been certified by the National Park Service. That's a separate process. We have about their certification, we have about maybe 40 of those throughout the state. And this is what we see a lot with in our unit, buildings and districts that are in the process of listing. That's a preliminary determination of individual listing. And so you can actually go through the tax credit approval process concurrently with your National Register listing process. And that's really a big driver right now. Next slide. So typical work that qualifies, it covers a lot, really with that building footprint inside, outside, in structural systems, your foundation, roof, it can be repair, replacement, covering, soffits, gutters, if you need to repoint the brick, paint your wood siding, maybe replace some boards, some stone repair, if you have a stoop or something, or maybe the columns on a porch, your cornice, that would be covered. Next slide. Oh, I already touched on some of that, but window repair, replacement, any masonry. On the interior, you want to refinish those wood floors if you have plaster walls, or if you want to paint the walls, stairs, maybe those need to get refinished, ceilings, maybe you might need to repair, maybe stick up some sheetrock, or maybe you have to repair some plaster work, any trim, and also include your systems, your HVAC, you need a new boiler, any plumbing, insulation, and even solar, and that's on the exterior. We do approve tax credits for solar panel installation. Next slide. So work that does not qualify, fencing and landscape, so really outside of that building footprint, paving and sidewalks, the appliances, because that's something you plug in, but you can't just put a whole new kitchen in if you want. Demolition costs, work performed outside of the building footprint, as I mentioned. The only really exception would be the reconstruction of a missing feature, such as a porch. And the reconstruction, the Park Service is very particular about the reconstruction method. So that would have to be based upon photographic evidence to rebuild a missing feature. And also work that does not meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. And those standards, those are federal guidelines, and they are used universally across the board. And they really do, they're kind of, general, because they're meant to apply to any building type, style, and condition. And really we talk about like the 3 R's, like your goal is really to retain that historic material. If it is damaged, repair historic material. But if it is deteriorated beyond repair, and you have to make that case, then it would be replacement in kind where possible, because we do approve substitute materials. Next
Linda,
slide.
another
yes.
quick question for you.
Yes.
So you mentioned that when a property is made National Register, that they're looking at the exterior and the interior.
Correct.
And if somebody would like to redo their kitchen, now I get that appliances aren't covered, but is there an expectation that the kitchen would look appropriate for that time period, or could you have a modern kitchen?
You could have a modern kitchen.
Okay.
Yep. So for commercial tax credits, we have the 20% federal, and the 20, now it's 20 or 30% for the state commercial, because recently, I think this past year, there was, if the investment is under 2.5 million, the credit will be 30%. If it is above 2.5 million, then it is 20%. So if the numbers work, it could be 40 to 50% back on the commercial tax credit. Next slide. So many of the same rules apply. It is a 3-part application, again, but this is a separate application because it's not just us. It goes to the National Park Service. A bit more involved. We do, and usually these are much larger projects, although I have seen in New York City where an owner, it's a multi-unit building, a row house, so they might live in one unit, they rent out the other 2. So we give them options if they want to do homeowner, but take only a percentage of the shared spaces, or if the numbers work, they could do the commercial tax credit on those income producing units. But, so, they might work with an architect, they might work with a tax specialist, because these are typically a bit larger projects. It is electronic though, electronic format again. So on the state side of the credit, the same thing applies as far as being a qualified eligible census tract. The rehabilitation must also meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. Major differences, you must receive the federal credit in order to take the state credit. You must spend a substantial amount of money. So there is a substantial rehabilitation test. And that's just a little bit of math. There's some examples on the National Park Service, the website, as far as the value of the land and the building, any depreciation to create that adjusted basis. What I mentioned before, so the project is not just reviewed by us, we kind of shepherd it through to the National Park Service, and they have that final review. That next slide. All right, so there's not just us. I always like to share some other organizations, some other resources out there. I'm sure you've worked with the Preservation League of New York State. They also do some technical assistance. They have grant programs. And sometimes I direct people who are not CLGs to them. They have grants for technical assistance. They're a little bit smaller grants, kind of more like feasibility grants, I would say. There's also Preserve New York grants, and those can fund surveys. So it could be a reconnaissance level survey, intensive survey. It could be a National Register nomination. And I think their deadlines are usually in the spring, just around our CLG deadlines. But they also do various webinars. It could be on some, interesting preservation topics, or they might do webinars on the tax credits. So certainly a good resource. The New York Landmarks Conservancy, I include them there. Even though they're based out of New York City, they manage the Sacred Sites program, and that is statewide. And it's great that they have that program, because that is for active congregations, properties that are religious properties that are eligible or listed on the National Register. There's not too much funding out there for religious properties, so they are a great resource. National Trust, of course, the nationwide nonprofit. Sometimes I'll see webinars from them that I'll share with CLGs. National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. This is or NAPAC. This is what a great organization. I just sent actually today. I sent it again because I didn't have the link. They do pretty much monthly webinars on various topics. The next one next week is going to be about local designation. It's really a great resource because they have an email listserv, and you are communicating with people who are just like you on a municipal board, on a commission. Could be a planner, staff to a board. And so the trainers, they also are representative of those fields, and they're very engaging. So some of the topics could be best practices. They talked about National Register before. And we are actually inviting them to our statewide conference in Rochester. That's in mid-April. I think it's the 15th to the 17th or 17th to the 19th. I have to check my dates. It's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We are going to be having them do commission training on that Monday. And some of the topics will be design review, a nice introduction to design review. And then we're going to do a mock kind of design review. I want to get more interactive with everybody and have people kind of do breakout groups, talk about a C of A application, and come together and talk about it. Because I find being interactive is much more engaging. And then also commissioners can feel comfortable with articulating their thoughts and their opinions as well. And a few other topics might be, I think, enforcement, violations, and public outreach and education. So, but I always learn, I've been doing this for a long time, but I always learn something because it's nice to hear what other people are doing in other parts of the country, because it could still be applicable to us in New York. So they're definitely a great organization. National Park Service, I always joke, they're like my mothership. You know, they really provide the guidance with, you know, the tax credits, but also they have preservation briefs that are on various topics as far as, you know, if you're trying to remove graffiti, if you're maintaining wood windows. They recently published an updated brief on substitute materials, which I think, I don't think I've done it already, but I will be sending an e-blast with that, because I think that is a hot topic for all commissions. But they have a lot of information on their website. And regionally, I'm sure you've of course worked with the Landmark Society of Western New York. It's great to have that organization because, you know, part of what I do is training for commissions, but it's great to have an organization that does guidance, research, and training as well. So you can kind of get a mix of different speakers and different assistants. So that is my long list of some of the assistants, the other organizations. Next slide. So now we get into the Certified Local Government Program. So the purpose, you're really integrating preservation at the local level, just like we're at the state federal level, we're kind of nudging our way into, you know, projects, because you have a seat at the table at the local level. When you establish a CLG, the purpose, like the municipality says, yes, our built environment, our historic resources, this is valuable to our community, it's important to community. And so we have this commission to help advise on those resources. The program also establishes the best practices. We have our model law, design standards. We use the Secretary of the Interior standards, and usually CLGs either adopt them or their design review criteria is based upon them. So still within the best practices realm. You're integrating federal, state, and local preservation efforts. So everyone is kind of talking, everyone's speaking the same language, and it also provides assistance to local communities. Next slide. So how did the CLGs come to be? I'm sure everyone has heard this story, but you know, you recognize Grand Central there on the screen. You know, back in the late 70s, Penn Central, the same ones with Penn Station, they wanted to construct a 50-story, an obscene office tower on Grand Central. But the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, they established their code in '65. They did designate Grand Central as an individual landmark. So constructing this huge tower was adverse and be not appropriate, so they denied the application. Penn Central took it all the way up to the state Supreme Court. And the court said it's not a taking because they are not entitled to the most reasonable return on their investment. They can still make money off it being a train station. They can still make money off, you know, having other businesses. So they're not entitled to that most profitable return. And this really, you know, validated local preservation, that they were constitutional, and it did benefit the public welfare. And so establishing the CLG program in 1980, that really provided that umbrella, kind of like that, you know, everyone's not doing, you know, different things. You have like one resource to go to. And currently there's over 2,000 CLGs across the United States. And in New York, we have 76. Next slide. So some nearby CLGs in your neck of the woods. We have Brockport, Irondequoit, Pittsford, Palmyra, Penn Yan. And then if you go a little bit east and west, you have some clusters of CLGs around Syracuse and around Buffalo. So there's definitely good representation in your neck of the woods. Next slide. So some of the requirements, and I pulled some of this from the our rules and regulations document. So first, of course, is creating and enforcing legislation for designation and protection of historic properties. So a designation, there's always two options. The designation can end at the commission, or more often than not, most CLGs have that recommendation up to the governing board. And then the protection of historic properties is that design review, C of A review process. Now, once you are a CLG, if you are looking to amend your code, it could be for administrative reasons. Maybe there's updating it to be more in keeping with the 2014 model law. You submit those to SHPO for review and approval. And that's just to make sure that's all in compliance with the CLG program. I haven't seen much that really deviated from it. So, and I try and provide a quick turnaround because I know, things take time as far as review, getting on the agenda and approval. So I like to provide quick turnarounds with those reviews. Establishing, maintaining qualified historic commission. So when a community does apply, I do request resumes just to see what are the backgrounds and qualifications of the members. We do have in our rules and regulations, there's the Secretary of the Interior Standard professional qualifications. So we try and see, is there someone that meets the architect, historian, any other preservation professional, maybe an archaeologist. But if not, I know some have realtors on there. But really the minimum qualification is that commitment and interest in preservation. Because there is required training. And even if someone is an architect, even if someone is a historian, there's also that preservation side of the training. So, and that is required annual, even like a little refresher. So now when you do have a newly appointed commissioner, because there is turnover, we do ask for the resumes just so we can keep a current list of members and their qualifications. And it doesn't have to be right when they're appointed. It can be submitted as part of the annual report. We're pretty flexible with that. Next slide. So another requirement, maintaining a system for survey, inventory of historic properties. Surveys, of course, provide that understanding of which properties should be protected and how to incorporate preservation goals into the community planning efforts. So maybe try and figure out, where can you direct maybe new development? What should we really set aside to protect? And I think I was looking in Chris, I know that I think the village did a reconnaissance level survey in 2014, which is great. That's pretty recent. So, and I will say inventory is really just everything known in your community. It could be documented as part of a survey. It could be your local landmarks and local districts. And it's also your National Register districts. It's just what do we know? What do we have in our community? And we do recommend, it's not a set time. I know in the rules and regs says every 5 years update your inventory, but we don't adhere to that. But it is a really good idea to every so often, look to see, what is the condition of the landmarks, the designated landmarks. Has anything changed? Because even they might not come before you for, a C of A, but you want to see, what projects have been going on possibly. So you might want to, I think some commissions that have, I think more in towns where they have fewer landmarks, maybe a handful of individual landmarks, they do kind of like a biannual like drive-by check to see what the condition of the buildings are. But it is good to kind of see what's going on and have current photos or something. But large-scale surveys, they're really not necessary for at least 15, 20 years. You could update an old one. It's just that as time moves forward, we're getting into some of the mid-century, some of the post-war brutalist design. So there's some resources that maybe we're learning, oh, hey, this might be important now. So we do recommend updating that every so often. Public participation, that's kind of across the board with any municipal board as far as adhering to the open meetings law. It is provide, of course, transparent and a fair review process. And it does foster, some appreciation and understanding of that built and cultural environment. So they understand if they sit in on a commission meeting, they understand really, oh, this is why the commissioners are protecting resources. And, they understand the overall process. And because I think preservation is kind of that outlier a lot. People might understand the building and fire code. People might understand where you're putting in a sewer line, but when preservation comes into play, sometimes that's a little bit of a, they need a little bit more education on that. Next slide. So actively participating in nominating properties to the State National Register. So as a CLG, we are required as part of one of those notifications before a state review board meeting, we provide a draft nomination 60 days in advance to the Historic Commission and the chief elected official for their review and comment. We provide the frequently asked questions for NR and also the NR criteria. And the CLG, the commission, you guys can discuss at one of your meetings, and you can provide a letter of comment, usually letter of support, but you can provide comments on, what your thoughts are on the nomination and whether it meets the National Register criteria. So I know Virginia Bartos is your NR reviewer, so she would be the one to be sending nomination. Like I think you had a historic district, I think you recently asked about as far as tax credits that Potter Place. So I think that was 2017 date. So way back when you would have received a nomination for that historic district where you could have had the opportunity to provide some comments on the nomination and a letter of support. Next slide. So as a CLG, one of administrative, I guess, requirements, annual report. And we did revise our report form probably 5-6 years ago. It was this crazy spreadsheet, and it wasn't the most useful thing. So we kind of streamlined it a little bit in a Word file, and it really focuses on some of the more important things and providing, allowing the CLG to provide a narrative response. Because we don't communicate with everybody every month, every year. So it's nice to still have those in hand as far as how many meetings, did you designate resources? Have you done training? Are there training needs? Do you need something from SHPO? What are some of your goals for the upcoming year? What are some of your achievements? Were there any difficult cases? It's kind of get a high level understanding of maybe what's going on in the community. And I do read them, and I do usually follow up if I see something that's like a flag for maybe a grant project. Hey, I might nudge you over to maybe apply for a CLG grant, or if I see something about training, I will reach out and see if we can schedule some training. So, it definitely is a helpful document to have. And we do send those out at the beginning of the year, probably maybe later this month or next month. We'll send those out, and then they won't have a due date until May 1st. It corresponds with the CLG grant applications. We do an audit every 4 years. My predecessor called it a check under the hood. We do it remotely now. And it's worked pretty well doing it electronically. We have a form that lists some of the required information that we need, that kind of summarizes what's been going on in the past 4 years. We do ask to see the code, list of current members. We like to see sample C of A applications for each year, because we like to see, what kind of projects are being submitted, have the meeting minutes to see kind of the discussion, and then the decision document, what is provided to the applicant. And we like to see if there's a list of landmarks, if there's any design guidelines, just like an overall assessment of the program. And I'll review that and provide a summary back to the CLG with some recommendations. If there are deficiencies, maybe there's training needs. Maybe I didn't get all 4 annual reports in. It could be something, maybe the code was amended without consultation, and there might be a problem with it. So things like that. But I've never, it's not something where if there is a deficiency where CLG is decertified. It's just something like, hey, let's talk, let's have a conversation and resolve any of these kind of issues. And it's also a good thing for me to learn, like, hey, is there something I need to be doing better when I'm working with CLGs, or something more than I could do? So nothing to fret about. I think I just finished my last one around this past year. I think we had 20. So it's a lot, but it's a good thing. It is required we have to do for the National Park Service. Next slide. Benefits. Hey, I'm getting out to the benefits. So we have the CLG grant program. I do have future slides on that, but high level, we are required to pass through at least 10% of our federal dollars to our CLG partners. And we do that through an annual competitive grant program. And that's really meant to support the local preservation program and the work of the commission. So I will share that in a few slides. Another benefit, technical training and assistance. So training, like tonight, this is more a SHPO, CLG 101, but I can always come back either virtually or in person. If you have questions, I'm not getting into like decision making and things like that, but with your code, but I can do that. I've talked about Windows, I've talked about ADA ramps, I've talked about solar. So it can be tweaked to whatever you want to learn about. And assistance, I've done advisory opinions on some of the C of A applications. Not too often, but some might ask about, Windows or have a little trouble with this, or their thoughts on substitute materials or new construction. So, and it really is advisory. I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is just my opinion, and that's to help support the commission. And we could also do anything if you are, with public outreach, education, working with other municipal boards. It really is, you can come at me with any kind of questions. If I don't have the answer, I work with like 60 other people and they will have the answer. And lastly, formal recognition by the state and federal government of the preservation efforts. Next slide. So more about grants. So, so we have a variety of, I'm going to give some examples in later slides, but covers a variety of topics, of course. We have surveys, district nominations, the training, that's more regional training. So if you were to apply, I know the town of Amherst applied for a grant through and partnered with Preservation Buffalo Niagara to do a series of 4 roundtable discussions. And they invited CLGs and commissions from neighboring communities in Erie and Niagara County. So it's more of that, let's get everybody together, like a regional, renting out a space and everything. Workshops, locations can be design guidelines, it can be brochures, anything with heritage tourism. Now these grants, they can range anywhere from a few thousand up to like 50,000. There's really no minimum or maximum. Typical grants range that we've awarded 10 to 20,000, I would say. We had some bigger ones because they were survey and digitizing records this past year. So think big. We always tell CLGs, think big. There's no required match, but we do ask up to 40%. You don't have to do 40%. That can be in donated or volunteer time. Often other officials, commission members add in their hours because they will be, assisting and working on the project anyways, administering the project. So that can be part of that match. An application, we will be sending those out either later this month or early next month. They're pretty straightforward. If you have ideas, throw them at me. I'm glad to talk through them. If there's anything related to survey NR, I will bring in the appropriate survey NR reps. We can all kind of help together. We do welcome draft grant applications just to, to see what you've written down, maybe help strengthen it a little bit, help focus the application, but you will have several months to complete that. It would not be due until May 1st. So plenty of time, any little back and forth, developing a concept, plenty of time to get that done. And the National Park Service recently changed it from 2-year to a 3-year timeline. So even more time, which is great, especially if you have surveys, if there's any issues with, procurement or anything, that you get a little bit more of a buffer, which is great. Next slide. So a few examples, brochures. We love brochures. They're pretty easy, straightforward. It can be about maybe the do's and don'ts. It could be about the commission's work, some basic information. I love that. Can I paint my house purple? Yes, you can. So those are kind of fun. Next slide. This brochure actually Albany did specific to energy efficiency and sustainability. And it is for not just property owners in the landmarked districts, but it can be anyone who has an older building because they have, a good chunk of their building stock is historic. So they kind of have the same issues, may not have to go to the Historic Commission, but they still want to do right by the building and make it more energy efficient without swapping it out for something that might not be in keeping with the character of the building. So this is definitely a good document to have. Next slide. Design guidelines, we love seeing those. These, I mean, they help commissions, government officials, developers, they better understand what is required. You know, in the code, you have the design review criteria, but design guidelines really take that mystery out of, you know, all that legal jargon. What does this mean? Because you have the visuals, you have photos, you have site plans and sketches, and it talks about what the commission would recommend and not recommend. And it can all be tweaked to your built environment as far as your historic context, the various architectural styles and building types. And then it really breaks it down to the various features and aspects of the property, whether it's windows, the roof, you know, the doors, the porch. You can tweak it for your commercial storefronts, any of those commercial building features of commercial buildings. So it really is definitely something that more commissions are applying for and adopting, because they can also reference these when they are making their decisions on a C of A application. Next slide. The Village of New Paltz, they have this fun educational video project. You can access these videos from their website. It's on YouTube. It was a mini series, very, you know, brief, maybe not even 10 minutes each, I think, but it covered the basis for preservation and local landmark designation, some do's and don'ts of, you know, for best practices. There were some testimonials and the C of A process. So this is a good way for public education and kind of outreach, because often, you know, sometimes commissions are, you know, people might not want to approach them, or they might, you know, this makes it a little bit more friendly, I guess you could say. And it was kind of fun. They actually came up to People's Island and filmed my predecessor, Julian Adams. He talked about the basis for local preservation. He was interviewed. And then he and I both made a cameo on the front, like sitting down, looking at plans, I think. And as far as their do's and don'ts, you know, the best examples, of course, are filmed in New Paltz, because that's, you know, their location. And then the don'ts, the what not to do, they're actually filmed in National Register District in Waterford, just across the way from People's Island. In Waterford, it is not a local district, so it's just national, so it has undergone change. So so they use some of the examples as far as, you know, reducing the size of the window openings, smaller windows, some of the differences in the porches. So, and it was kind of smart to do it that way, because you don't want the you know, the bad examples to be also local, because then they might say, oh, that's so-and-so's house, you know. So it was kind of fun and just something different outside the box that they decided to do. Next slide. Buffalo did a preservation ready survey. So this can, you know, reconnaissance level assert, intensive level survey. This one, they were looking at a specific neighborhood, commercial industrial resources. They documented, I forgot how many, but tons. I mean, this was like a $50,000 project. And they did a brief conditions assessment, you know, as far as maybe the potential for listing on the National Register and use of the tax credits. And it led to a lot of listings. And in my colleague, they're big users of the commercial tax credit in Buffalo. Next slide. Workshops. I did one in Greenport with the commission. And, you know, I talked about CLG and the homeowner tax credit. That was a rare location on Long Island where you had a National Register district overlapping and qualifying the census tract. Doesn't happen too often on Long Island. And they had other speakers. The historian talked about the National Register development of the district. We had a testimonial of going through the tax credits, but also working with the Historic Commission. We had a regional organization representative talk about new construction in a historic district. So, you know, it was kind of fun, a little walking tour, you know, and I think we recently funded a few more workshops that were more public outreach and education to talk about, you know, to have the property owners meet, because a lot of people, they might not know they're in a local district. You know, yes, you're around old buildings, but they might not think preservation. I have to go before a board to get you know, changes reviewed by a commission. So this, you know, these workshops are a way to really educate and make sure it's, you know, do their part to make sure that the owners are like, oh, okay, I forgot, I guess I am in a historic district, and get a better understanding of that review process. What are the expectations? And really just kind of build that relationship with the community. Next slide. I think this is my last one for grant examples. Albany did a historic preservation plan. I know municipalities have their comprehensive plan, and then usually preservation, cultural resources are kind of folded in, incorporated into that. But this is just preservation. And this was really well done. Their consultant was from out of state, but they did a good job with, you're looking at the past, current conditions, and what do we want for the future. And they did a lot of public outreach to the residents, like what does preservation mean to you? What do you think of neighborhood character? Just some general questions to get feedback on what they think of preservation, what they think of the commission, design review process, and really what is important to them and their community. And it made recommendations for surveys, maybe design guidelines, training. It really was nuts to bolts preservation. And they have moved forward with a few CLG grants to do some of that survey work. So it's definitely a good product, something good for Albany to do. Next slide. Just some basic do's and don'ts, and I think I'm done. So just for in general, for the commission, it's very important to have that preservation ordinance right by your side. To be familiar with the process, because that is your roadmap. So you understand as far as whether it's designation or whether it's a C of A review process, to understand that formal process. Be friendly with all applicants, of course, leave them with a good impression. I know someone, I forgot who it was, I attended a webinar, but they said you want to make it easy for them to do the right thing and make it hard for them to do the wrong thing. So, that kind of goes along with that. Using specific criteria outlined in the ordinance for designating your individual landmarks in your districts. So you're citing that. So you're justifying that criteria. So people know that you're not saying, oh, this is the most beautiful building. Well, that's not a criteria. I'm also using the design review criteria in the ordinance when you're making a decision on a certificate of appropriateness, when a building is being altered or demolished, proposal for demolition, just to justify that design, the design review criteria and decision. I'm going to always review each application as a separate case because maybe, let's say, for solar, solar is really case by case because it depends on the roof line. It depends on the siting of the building. If it's a standalone building, if it's a row house, it really does vary. And also even windows, like, the condition of the windows, like having a survey done, understanding of which ones can be repaired versus replaced, or justifying if, partial demolition, or justifying, maybe a specific door or an addition on a building. So, because not everything is the same scenario. So it's always applying that same criteria based on the condition of that particular property. Next slide. Well, I already said this, not applying pretty or in good taste, as far as a alteration or designation, I should say. You don't need a design of all new buildings to fit a particular architectural style. As far as new construction or additions, that has to be sensitive to the historic building, size, massing, scale, of course, but it doesn't have to be, new construction doesn't have to be colonial revival because everybody else is colonial revival. So you don't have to restrict yourself to that particular style. It should be a representative of its point in time for its construction. No embarrassing the applicant. I know I have to put this because my predecessor, some of these are from him, and I think it has happened in the past. So I always have to include that. Don't turn down an application without giving the applicant some guidance on how to improve it or how to meet the criteria. So if they need to, bring in samples, if they need to have a qualified consultant, look at the various windows to do a study, or if you need a structural engineer to look at a building, it's providing that extra guidance, like, hey, this is what we need. That kind of ties into the last point, and don't be afraid in asking for more information. If it's incomplete, probably shouldn't go before the commission anyways, but if there's not enough information to make that decision, don't be afraid to ask for that additional information, because you want to, when you render a decision, you want to have all the information you need so you can feel confident in setting the criteria and drafting that decision. Next slide.
Linda, can I ask you to expand on one of these?
Yes.
So they require a design of all new buildings, alterations, or additions to follow a particular theme or architectural style. Is this getting at that concept that sometimes we get trapped in a mode of making something maybe, for lack of a better term, Disney-esque, that
Yes.
we create historic areas where maybe they're not naturally occurring?
Yeah, because what, and I can share actually an old landmark or newsletter that talks about new construction in districts. Like, so you want to, let's say you're walking down the street, you kind of want to recognize, like, oh, that was built probably 1930. Oh, that looks like a 1955 building. Oh, wow, that's probably 1860. Oh, that's 2010. You want to be able to recognize that that's it is a building of its time. And I like what Julian kind of talks about in his landmarker. You talk about like a family of buildings, how you have some that are like the grandma, you have the daughter and then the granddaughter, like you can see how they relate to each other, but like, oh, this one's 1840, this one's 1920, this one's, so you kind of want to see that change over time. So any kind of new construction, it can kind of take cues as far as the size, massing, and scale, maybe roof line, maybe setback. It could be, whether the facade has some recessed areas, or, if it's something like Queen Anne, maybe it's asymmetrical. So you want to take it down to the basic form and then keep things kind of simple and look at materials too. If it's, wood or brick, you might have some flexibility there, but you want to be able to recognize that, oh, that's new construction. You don't want to trick the person. Keys to success, education for both public and commission. And then, because we can always do any kind of workshops with the commission and general public. I have done that. Coordination with other municipal departments is always good. To have that good relationship, make sure that they understand your roles and responsibilities. That purpose statement in that ordinance really kind of drives home kind of what y'all do. But I have seen some commissions, even if a proposed project isn't on a landmark district or a landmark building, they can still provide advisory opinions on certain site plan reviews and new construction and developments. I've seen commissions also provide like an annual report or summaries to chief elected official or the municipal board, just to talk about what they've done and some of the positives that they've done. So it's good to kind of educate your fellow government officials. And fairness and good decision making, that really just ties it back to the ordinance and looking at the criteria. And being consistent with that. So next slide. And I think I'm done. So there's my kind of, I think that I did that. This is a PDF. So you guys have that. So you can, have my contact information and the link to our website as well. But I am, any questions, feel free.
Does anyone have any questions from our audience or from commissioners? Would you like to, if you just can come up? No, go ahead, Jean.
You can sit down here if you'd like, Jane. Or if you want. All right, let me turn that.
I'm Jean Whitney, and I did help write the law in 2007, so I'm very interested in what you've had to say. You mentioned that there's a new model law. So does Fairport's law, as it was written in 2007, we used the model law that was available then to write our law. Are we still in compliance?
I believe so, and I want to say, did I do an audit? Pardon me, just 1 second. I'm doing this kind of on the fly.
Linda, I'll chime in while you're looking up some information. And I'm not a professional like you are, but from my reading of, my familiarity with the 2014 model law and what Fairport has, it does remain in compliance. Now, we are going to be undergoing a zoning code update, and so again, any changes that we might make to the historic preservation regulations will be reviewed by Linda to ensure that they are A-OK with maintaining our CLG designation.
Yeah, and I don't think Fairport, you've been audited recently, because that's when I do look at the code or when there is a proposed amendment. But I will say, I'm sure it's in compliance. The difference between the two codes, like the 2014 update, it doesn't give a commission more power. It wasn't, it was to provide a little bit more clarity and process to kind of stretch out the code a little bit more, with criteria, with hardship process, with appeals, with certain sections might need to kind of be stretched out a little bit, because my predecessors, they looked at the old code and to see, what have we learned in like 30 years? Like, where are some of the loopholes? Where do things need to be clarified? Things like that. So CLGs that have used the old code is not wrong. It's just that maybe if you're updating it, maybe there's some areas that maybe you want to provide some clarity on the designation process, or maybe you want to look at the hardship process. So there's maybe these areas that you might want to revise. Not that they're wrong, but maybe that you want to revise them to provide some clarity. So that's really the difference between the two.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm concerned about this zoning business, but we won't talk about that now. My other question is, there is a building, it's called the Potter Building, that was not eligible for National Register when Virginia looked at it, maybe 2014. And basically, I think the non-eligibility was because the inside had been changed so much. But it is now part of a historic district. So my question is, does that make it eligible for tax credits if it complies with people living in it and so forth? But does it make it eligible for tax credits even though it wasn't initially a standalone for National Register?
What historic district?
The Potter Historic District in the village.
Let's see. So the difference, and I think I'll have to probably need to look at the address, but I will say if it is within a historic district and the exterior retains sufficient integrity, it still looks like that early 20th century building, then it would be contributing. So it's listed on the National Register as a contributing building to that historic district, and therefore it would be eligible for historic tax credits if it meets that, the qualifying census tract there, which I think the Potter's district is. Yes. So do you have an address?
53 West Church Street. It's the big building that's kind of the cornerstone of the district.
Oh, let's see. Okay.
I'm just curious. I don't own it, but
I do see it as a contributing resource to the historic district. So depending on ownership, if it's a private home, if it's income producing property, since it is listed on the National Register as a contributing building to the district, it would be eligible for historic tax credits pending, homeowner versus commercial tax credits.
Linda, if I could ask a question off of that then. So if a parcel in a district is, let's say, non-contributing, then it doesn't qualify for tax credits?
Correct.
Okay.
Because that building,
Okay.
typically the non-contributing buildings were constructed after the period of significance. So I'm not sure about this particular district, but if it ended in 1945, then anything built after that would be non-contributing. And then let's say if it was a 1920s building, if it was significantly altered to a point where you don't recognize it, then it would also be non-contributing. So it could be one of two things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
My last credit is, in Fairport, let's say there are 10 buildings that are on the National Register. Does the state notify them once every 5 years, once every 10 years, that they're eligible for tax credits? Or do the people just need to remember?
We do not notify them.
Okay. Okay, that, I just wondered, because there's another building that's been sold. I hope the Baptist Church, I hope they know that they're eligible. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
And we do have information on our website, public information. We have basic handouts about the tax credit program. So you are more than welcome to direct anybody to those documents.
I have a couple questions. This is Doris. You talked about, I thought you said something about developing some information about substitute materials. Is that something that's being developed, or is that something we could get access to?
You can get
I'm
access
very-
to what the National Park Service, they recently updated one of their preservation briefs on substitute materials.
Oh.
It is available on their website, but I would be happy to send that in a separate email, and then that can be shared.
That would be great. I think it'd be a good resource for us to have on hand when we have applicants. You know, sort of a guideline,
Yes.
design guideline in a sense that it's give us a start. That leads me to my next question. We've talked many times about doing design guidelines, and we made a very minor attempt at doing some ourselves. How do people approach that? Do these groups write them themselves? Do they just hire an architect firm and then work with them to customize it to their vision? How do they go about it?
I think if you want more full, like comprehensive design guidelines with photos and sketches, you would hire an architect firm to develop those guidelines, and you would work with them. You know, I can provide examples, of course, to get a sense of expectations for them, but you would work with them with the context, the types, and the what is recommended and not recommended. The only one I've seen really, I think I've seen some have done them on their own. I know Saratoga has done some basic ones, individual kind of PDFs, but which you can still do if there's something that you need immediately done. But I find the larger, more expansive and comprehensive ones very beneficial. And you can, and I do know that the Preservation League maintains a list of consultants that you could look at and get ideas. Also, maybe the Landmark Society of Western New York could provide some guidance on firms to reach out to for design guidelines. And then you could also, talk to us if you want to come in for a CLG grant, because that's definitely an eligible project.
Well, I think, again, we have talked about possibly applying for a grant, but the actual development, we just get stalled because we don't know where to start, really. And so investigate, working with an architect, and we can develop with that architect what we're going to need, what the cost will be, and then be able to apply for a grant. So,
Yep.
Thank you. That's very helpful. As far as the National Register, what would qualify and what would not qualify? You had two different slides, and for instance, the landmark landscaping wouldn't qualify. They couldn't apply to put in new landscaping and use tax credits. So can you give those two lists to us, to Jill? I've just never seen that.
Yeah,
uh,
I'll actually
information before.
provide the slides.
Oh, all of them?
Yep, as soon as as soon as we take this down off of the presentation, I will forward that to you.
That was very clear, and that's the first time I've ever really seen that, of what would qualify and what wouldn't, and I think it would be helpful when we talk to people
Agreed.
about the benefits of National Register.
And I will share also the homeowner tax credit application. The last page also has a list of qualified expenditures, so I can share that as well.
I assume we can just download the application for National Register. And is that your office that we would be working with on the preliminary application?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Linda. This has just been a really amazing overview, I think. And, you know, I've done some reading online. There's just nothing that takes the place of an expert just sharing this with us and giving examples. And I know we've all been taking a lot of notes. So I think once we think this through, we might be reaching back out again. But we really appreciate your taking the time and sharing this information with us.
Of course, my pleasure. This is what I love to do. Even if it's virtual, I like having this interaction with folks because I think it's helpful to have that conversation versus here's a bunch of documents.
Right. It makes a difference.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you need to go and get some rest. Get completely over your sinus infection. I hope you feel better, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you, Linda.
Good night, Linda.
Bye. Good night.
I wanted to ask about barn grants, but I haven't looked on the site lately, so I'll look it up
Yeah.
first.
I
Grants for barns.
Yeah,
I'll look it up first.
I'm pretty sure Linda will come back if we ask her.
mean, I can think of so many other areas that we can get more training in, you know, just different things that they brought up, you know, tax credit workshops, different educational opportunities for people in the community, for us. I'm excited about the conference. It sounds like there might be some topics this year that are really more specific to our, village size and what we do. So I thought it was really well done. And thank you, Jeannie. Your questions were really, really excellent.
The zoning thing, I just don't understand it enough to ask a question, so I thought I'll just.
Well, you know where I'm located.
So I think we'll leave, but thank you
Yeah.
for letting me, A, ask questions, and B, just, it's good to be re-taught some things.
Yes.
Because I did
Refresh.
National Registers,
Mm-hmm.
and Angevine's house was the first one, and I learned a lot. The Congregational Church, thank goodness Virginia could help me, and I actually worked with Katie Como, because there was an architecture, I just didn't know how to describe it,
Mm-hmm.
so it was good. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you too.
Well, I guess with that, we probably can wrap up our meeting.
Yeah, I was going to say, does anyone have any other business that they wanted to bring up? No? There was one thing I was just going to suggest that if we had talked about looking into designations, districts, that type of thing, and this is why this was so important to have this tonight too, suggesting that maybe our next meeting, if we don't have a C of A, if we could do more of a workshop format, if that would be really helpful. And Jill had talked about finding some larger maps of the village from the 2014 survey, and that we could sit around the table. It would be a public meeting, of course. We could sit around the table and, look at the different areas of the village and discuss that. So I was just thinking if the format of the next meeting, maybe making it more of a work session.
How did the zoning meeting go? Wasn't there one in December?
So we haven't officially started the zoning code update yet.
Okay.
We will be meeting, we'll have a kickoff meeting soon, so all of that information will be out. The contract was actually approved by the village board in November. All the weeks mold together, right? We talked about that earlier. So the zoning code update will be starting very soon. There will be a number of opportunities for public participation. And the best participation that we have, and sort of the basis for a lot of what we're going to do, has been created through the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan is really that baseline to start the discussion about the zoning code. So there will be opportunities for the public to participate, to comment on the written code and any graphics, etc., map changes. So that will all be coming up in the coming year.
Then if we're all set, can I have a motion to adjourn the January 4th, 2024 meeting? I had to say 24.
Oh, by the
meeting.
way, no, I won't make a motion, but I want to congratulate Kara, who was appointed chair for another year.
I was?
Yes, I think it was on the agenda.
And also on that note, Doris, congratulations to you too. Doris has kindly agreed to serve another 5-year term with the Historic Preservation
you.
Commission. So
I'm very
thank you
excited.
for your time. And of course, we appreciate every single land use board member in the village, because the land use boards are what make the village so fabulous. So from me and the rest of the community, thank you to everyone.
You're welcome,
Well,
thank
thanks,
you.
Jill.
It's a privilege.
Yeah. So, I was going to say, also, can a chair make a motion? Yeah, okay. Yeah, but I just didn't. All right. So you made the motion, a second? I'll make a second.
Oh.
Then I'll second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes.